I guess yes. Recording started, so yeah.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second talk in citing vulnerability. If you recall, our first version was to do with quantifying vulnerability by Dipanshu Mohan of the O.P. Jindal Global University, speaking about ethnographic work, the databases compiled, and the attempt to quantify vulnerability in terms of the workers that he interviewed, the communities that he engaged with. Today, there is a shift of topic. We are looking at aging and vulnerabilities through the specific domain of literature. Krishna Baldev Vaid's text is the key focus here. Aging has been a central concern to much critical work, much of the United Nations work, and a lot of course, literature itself being produced in and around it. So today, Ira Raja, the University of Delhi English professor, will speak to us on aging and vulnerability with specific references to and case studies of Krishna Baldev Vaid's text. Welcome to all of you for joining in. Some of us have very unstable connections, so if you see us disappearing off the screen and off the meet, put it down to the technological glitches we have accustomed to living with. We only hope that Ira's connection holds as the speaker of the day. So thank you all for coming. Thanks to the UNESCO chair team, Atul and Meenakshi, to Anna, of course, who makes all things possible. I'll now hand this over to Atul for the formal introductions. And thank you, Ira, first for agreeing to do this. Over to you, Atul.
Thank you, sir. Professor Ira Raja teaches at the Department of English at the University of Delhi, where she teaches South Asian literatures in English, as well as cultural studies and critical theory. Her research focuses on feminism and gender studies, aging and intergenerational relationships, as well as consumption and food studies. She is the editor of Grey Areas, an anthology of contemporary Indian fiction on aging, published by the Oxford University Press in 2010, and has published in journals such as South Asian History and Culture, South Asia, and the Journal of Commonwealth Literature. She has also contributed to the year's work in English studies. Today, her talk is titled Nation and Aging, Mother India's Mutable Body. With this, may I welcome Dr. Ira Raja. Please, over to you.
Thank you, Atul. Thank you, Pramod. Thank you, Anna, for inviting me. And many thanks to Atul and Meenakshi for the logistics and getting everything in place. This talk is drawn from an essay that I published earlier this year, and I've presented a version of it last year. But as I was, trying to cut it back to fit a 40-minute slot, as I don't know, I think it happens with many of us, and I'm compulsive editor of my work. So I was revising the argument, and some of the bits that I thought were getting, maybe they're better as you're reading on the printed page than listening in. So I've cut some of that stuff out. So if there are gaps in the argument that you feel something doesn't hold together, please ask me, and I should be able to hopefully, draw on the bits that I've left out and clarify. So without much ado, so we have the screen. So this is the image that you see on your screen. I'll begin by talking about that. What does it mean to think of Mother India as an old woman? You consider this, it's a print from Calcutta Art Studio from the 1870s. It's called Bharat Bhiksha. And it features Bharat India as this old crone. She's clasping a string of prayer beads in one hand, as you can see, and she's prodding this child towards this luminous Britannia with his other hand. And the India of this title, Bharat Bhiksha, clearly recalls, I think, to my mind, Bharat Mata, which is a reference to Mother India that had become common by this time. But as you can see, she's not the resplendent goddess-like a creature of calendar art whom we've become familiar with. But looks like a rather sad old woman. You know, she's run the course of her life and she's entrusting her child's future to the care of this rival mother, you know, who is fuller breast offers a promise of nourishment that the old crone can clearly no longer afford. So what's happening here? You know, you can think of social change, or, you know, India as this glorious civilization of the past that has, you know, wound down or run the course of its life. And age is being used as a trope for thinking about that kind of civilizational aging, you know, and it's a trope that has a long history. You know, thinking of age as a means of thinking through social change is a very long history, and it has also received considerable commentary. Certainly when you think of Western thinking through 18th and 19th century theories of progress, social evolution, they've drawn consistently on this seemingly neutral idea, you know, that cultures, they are born, they move through infancy, they become mature, they grow old, and then they die, in a manner that mimics the biological growth of living organisms. Theories of social progress, however, they sound a lot less anodyne and, you know, a lot less harmless when they extend beyond the life cycle of individual nations. And when you think of, you know, going to the realm of colonialism, this is particularly true of cultural difference from and within European colonies, where racial inequality was all too often articulated as an inequality of power. It was not just gendered, not just between men and women, that led, for instance, to the characterization of India as Oriental bride, or, you know, the stereotype of the effeminate Bengali, but also between different age groups, you know, evident in this colonial casting of India as childish or senile. Additionally, age offered colonial ideology a ready means of resolving the problem of dismissing certain cultures as uncivilized. So you have the long tradition of European preoccupation with India, as has been observed, and most notably by Edward Said, but also Ashish Nandi. India was characterized by a temporal splitting of the good India, which lay in the past, from the bad India, which lived in the present. Mapped onto the biological life cycle, such splitting allowed for the considerable achievements of Indian civilization to be attributed to the days of its youth and its current degradation to senescence. So as Nandi writes, and I'm quoting, "The civilized India was in the bygone past. Now it was dead and museumized," unquote. No, quote continues, "The present India," as his argument goes, "was only nominally related to its history. It was India only to the extent that it was a senile, decrepit version of her once youthful, creative self." Moreover, as part of the progress-regress cycle, it was destined to go through periodic decline, whereas the temporal framework of linear development to which Europe laid claim meant that it could look forward to endless progress for itself. Needless to say, for India to be part of the trajectory of unlimited progress, it had to enter European history, a condition that was met in the fulfillment of the colonial project. So what you have here is an ideological deployment of age, in which age is clearly figured as undesirable. It's a state of decline, decay, vulnerability, weakness. And as my discussion of the text today will show, that it's a trope that continues to be deployed in the context of the post-colonial nation. So I'll offer a close reading of iconoclastic Hindi writer K.B. Vaid's short play. It's called in Hindi Hamari Buriya, and it was translated shortly after it was written in Hindi, Our Old Woman, in the year 2000. I'll attempt to explore what it means to think of the post-colonial nation as a destitute old woman. I'll argue that while our old woman continues to deploy, like in the play, Vaid continues to deploy age as a metaphor for social, political, cultural decline. It's a nation that has been abandoned by its children. But it also feeds off the materiality of the aging body to do something, I think, quite different and altogether more intriguing. So, when you think of the aging body, the way the aging body is described in the play, it has this, manifest lack of integrity. It's a body, it's a leaky body, and and also at the same time, the woman is described in very contradictory terms, which suggests that that this body is located along this very slippery location, along these rigid boundaries of youth and age. It's hard to tell. In some ways she's very youthful, in other ways she's very old. So it uses then that to this kind of materiality of the aging body to underwrite what I argue is a more ambivalent, if not quite optimistic, account of the nation as an entity that resists totalizing narratives, especially ones that revolve around notions of an essential, exclusive, and timeless India. So so it's a body that's vulnerable, but what does this figuring of the national body as vulnerable, what is it that allows us to do? How does it allow us to reimagine? What are the ways in which it allows us to imagine the nation? I think that's the kind of question that's in my head that I'm trying to address through the play, through my reading of the play. So what's the play about? It features a group of 5 men and women. All of them, this give the impression of being more than one, and I'm reading from stage description. Their costumes are emblematic of the various costumes of the country. And then encircling this eponymous old woman of the title, who meanwhile reclines on a high, antique, throne-like bed amidst the beautiful ruins of an old building. And she's cut loose from familiar space and significance. Even as she remains silent, the multitude that is represented by the surrounding chorus cogitates feverishly about her identity. Who is she? Who could she be? And as quickly becomes clear, in addition to being a real person, she must be somebody's mother. The old woman also corresponds to the post-colonial nation, with the chorus doubling up as her unmindful children, oblique citizens, and who are trying to work out what they owe her. Should we take her home? What should we do with her? So here, there's a cut in the text, and I hope that's not, that doesn't read as an absence. But I'll quickly, a brief quotation from Stephen Helgeson. There's this essay called Radicalizing Temporal Difference, Anthropology, Postcolonial Theory, and Literary Time. So in this essay, Helgeson points to a contradiction at the heart of postcolonial scholarship. And he says that postcolonial scholars are deeply critical of the colonial gambit of placing the non-Western other notionally in another time than that of the West. So they're suspicious of this move, that why should the non-West inhabit this kind of time of tradition, timelessness, suspended in time, as it were, whereas or of mythology, and the West only occupies the time of history. At the same time, he as Helgeson points out, that there are other scholars who simultaneously and contradictorily affirm this idea of separate temporalities. I mean, you only have to think of Dipesh Chakrabarty for the challenge that, they argue that it's important to affirm the idea of separate temporalities, because that's the way you pose a challenge to the unitary time of Western modernity. So as Helgeson observes, the work of postcolonial scholars is not always clear on how the colony, as culturally and historically distinct from the colonial power, is to retain its distinction in the face of the spatial expansion of capitalist modernity, quote, forcing what is different and separate together. So how do you do that? So there's this contradiction, and it's very well to affirm this idea of separate temporalities, but how do you go about affirming or maintaining that distinction in the face of capitalist modernity? That's a question that he says goes unaddressed. So what I'm going to do is, without getting into the details of Helgeson's argument, but the figure of the old woman in Wets play is interesting to me because of the way in which she allows us to scramble these different temporalities and arrive at an understanding of time that is more complex, and I'll talk about what is it complex in relation to, and that's the bit that will come later. So it's really the question of these multiple temporalities and their coexistence, and how they're mutually imbricated. I think that's the question that I'll address and that I'm interested in. And then we'll see, come back to what we started out with. How does that help us rethink the nation? So that this distinction between these different temporalities should collapse was certainly an intended outcome of the structural reinvention of the newly independent nation, that was India, through the process of modernization, which also served as an implicit national response to the colonial imputation of decay and decline. And here I say that, the 19th century theories of progress, etc., they resurface in the theory of modernization, So although modernization theory as the preeminent critical framework for making sense of the process by which traditional societies become modern seems very future-oriented, more future-oriented than the idea of separate temporalities that post-colonial scholars hold so dear. But the manner in which it approaches the study, or it approached the study of social change in non-Western societies, was deeply grounded in the ideologies of evolution and developmentalism, which had provided imperialism with much of its sanctimonious and quasi-scientific rhetoric. As a new social imaginary of which industrialization, urbanization, and development were the necessary attributes, modernization signaled a progressive march towards an unending improvement of the human condition. Deeply imbued with positivistic assumptions about linear progress, modernization theory was a 20th century take on the Enlightenment legacy of the great idea of progress, enabling within its framework for the aging India of Oriental scholarship to resurface as the traditional India, while the previously young Europe was now recast as modern Europe. To be sure, the template for the mother's transformation, here I'm coming to the play, as visualized by the chorus in Vaird's play, it adheres closely to this imagined transformation of the nation in the framework of modernization theory. So when they discover that here is his mother, now she presents this problem, what are we going to do with her? And you see that and I quote from the text, how the mother merges seamlessly with the nation, and she is set to sparkle with accoutrements of capitalist modernity, high-rise buildings, advanced technology for the most mundane tasks. And I'm now quoting from the play. They're all, each line or each phrase is spoken by one individual. So male, female, female. That's the way it goes. So I won't take the name every time. Just imagine that every sentence is spoken by a different character. All this publicity will bring in tons of tourists. We'll get filthy rich. These ruins will become radiant then. Our old woman also, she'll sparkle. The ruins will turn into a tall tower with 101 stories. Each story will contain 1,000 suits. With each suit will have scores of comforts, washing machines for washing clothes, machines for dyeing clothes, machines for losing fat, machines for tit and for tat. To each her own computer, everything in obscene abundance, our old woman, a virtual doll. You can see that's very Beckettian, actually, the play, and if there's time, there'll be more about that. So the chorus plans for transforming the old woman into this whole new woman include, amongst other things, giving her a facelift, getting her wrinkles ripped, her hair bobbed, rigging her out in tight blue jeans, and so on. These plans, however, change abruptly when the chorus realizes that material motivations for getting the mother to look young and modern might not be as fully rewarded as it had imagined. And if you take it to the national apply it to the nation, then, the tourists are coming for this ancient India, and if everything's modern, they'll stop coming. So that the mother in her modern avatar may not be as attractive to wealthy foreign tourists now prompts the chorus to work for the exact opposite ends. Let's hire Western experts to ensure that, quote, the ruins look even more ruined and that the old woman looks even older. Other changes envisioned to impress and attract foreign money, including turning, quote, these ruins into an ashram, a very traditional ashram, and transform our old woman into a goddess. The nation's presumably steady move away from tradition towards modernity, when mapped onto the mother's body, in other words, quickly throws into doubt any presumptions about linear progression, be it for the individual or the nation. The mother's otherworldliness, her superstitions, her obsession with untouchability, these are all, all these phrases are quoted from the text. Her blind faith, her addiction to hocus pocus, her ritualism may be seen to be cultivated with an eye to the market, to the tourist market, as suggested in the chorus's plans. Alternatively, it may be seen to bear testimony to the truth of Neil Lazarus's contention that within the space-time of capitalist modernity, emergent features, including those rising to dominance, exist alongside other features, whether themselves dominant or residual, major or minor, of earlier historical provenance. Both interpretations, different from each other as they are, reveal the presumed trajectory of modernity as linear, unidirectional, and monolithic, to be more of an ideological projection than an accomplished fact. So this idea, so here is the ways in which the mother is describing, however you look at it, it's, puts paid to this notion that there is anything called linear progress through the body of the mother. Further, not unlike the abstract entity of the nation, the physical body of the mother, very obviously marked by age, also provides, quote, instances of overlapping and intertwined temporalities with unclear boundaries between past and present. In what is critical to my unfolding argument, the old, snotty, bearded mother, who is also simultaneously describable as beautiful, radiant, and luminous, invites the reader to think of the somatics of age in ways that challenge the widespread obsession with linear progress and time-worn questions aimed at establishing how old is old, when does it begin? As Rudiger Kuno avers, the fact of overlapping and intertwined temporalities in the context of post-colonial nations, which points to an uncertain and incomplete disengagement from the colonial past, also resonates with preoccupations that older people display through questions such as how much of their earlier selves live on in old age, and in what ways can they continue to recognize themselves as being the same person that they once were. So both, whether it's a body or the post-colonial nation, struggles with this kind of a neat temporality, that's cut and dried, and that moves forward. So they're saying that it's much more scrambled than suggested by these. By theories of aging, the stages theory of aging, or modernization theory. Are you all with me? Okay.
I think several of us are.
Okay, so I'll continue, yeah?
Yeah.
So to the extent that the questions to do with continuity, chronology and linear progress plague the post-colonial nation as much as they do the aging body, one might conclude that the latter serves better as a metaphor for the nation than either youth or midlife. I will now examine more closely how the physical attributes of the aging body in where it's play, which are initially readable as signs of decline, go on to underwrite an altogether more enabling, if irreverent, reading of the nation as one that is heterogeneous, discrepant, and mutable, rather than timeless, ageless, and unchanging. In an essay titled The Indian Context and Subtext of My Text, Ved makes a striking claim. I see little unanimity or clarity as to what constitutes Indianness, he says. An early short story, Budhya Ki Gathri, on which the play Our Old Woman came to be based, explored precisely this theme. As Ved explains, the story was an oblique and unabashed admission of his own enormous indecision as to what constitutes Bharatiyata or Indianness, and his equally enormous ambivalence towards what some of his more patriotic peers represent as Bharatiyata. So this is a direct quote from Ved. Ved's play extends the concerns of its short story with defining Indianness in a number of ways. And this play is useful in undercutting the view of time as an irreversible phenomena associated with modernization theories, distancing and differentiating the present from a previously superseded reality. Problematically, however, the idea of multiple temporalities that intertwine and overlap each other can be seen to underscore a mutually harmonious coexistence, such as Manisha Basu claims to be characteristic of the temporal structure of metropolitan Hindutva, with its system of instantaneous simultaneities. So I'm drawing a contrast between, this idea of there are different types of heterotemporalities, and you might see that an example of that in the Hindutva discourse, where you're placed on the same temporal plane as your mythological forebears. You go to Akshardham temple, and you can just take a boat ride and occupy, and immediately be transported to Vedic India, etc. So it's what that does is this dispensing with the idea of temporal distance and what Basu calls, and consequently the possible energy of difference. That is also something that you lose. So the mother's aging body in Ved's play, I suggest, is closer to what Helgeson might call a radical heterotemporality, which exposes the jagged edges of difference that constitute, qualify, even contradict each other, in what leads to a thickening of time rather than its elimination. So when you're transported unproblematically and seamlessly from the present into the Vedic past, you're not thickening time, you are eviscerating time, or you're eliminating time. Whereas this kind of, the mutual coexistence of these contradictions leads to a thickening of time. So there's heterotemporality, and then there's heterotemporality, and I'm drawing a distinction between these two types. The kind that we found in the discourse of Hindutva and the kind we find in Ved's play. Whether she's seen as an individual or a substitute for the national community, the mother personifies a radical multiplicity that includes mythical time, and I'll leave out the examples from the text, and you can ask me, that'll save me some time. Domestic time, national time, personal time, cosmic time, spiritual time, embodied time, biological time, historical time, agricultural time. Just to give you an example, she'll bloom again and she puts forth a new flower, geological time, like a doll of sand, and so on. So, there are all these different kinds of temporalities. If you look at the way the mother is described, you can see them all come together in her. In refusing to collapse the distance and consequently the difference between separable sequences of past, present, and future, the concept of radical heterotemporality, I suggest, lends a density to time that is elided in the concepts of poly, multi, or overlapping temporalities, which can serve to paper over the cracks and fissures between them. Taking my cue from Helgeson, I suggest that the time of the nation being impossible to reduce completely to evolutionist, colonial, and culturalist paradigms means that the radical heterotemporality of the mother may in fact be beyond the power of language to represent. To be sure, the chorus repeatedly qualifies, even negates its account of the old woman, deploying elocutionary and lexical modalities such as the use of axioms, interrogation, disavowal, and contingency to cast the entire narrative as a fundamental hesitation regarding the very reliability of representation. So the constant questioning, she's doing that, is that? So, every time one character says something, the other character questions them, and sometimes they question themselves. So although it is possible to read self-doubt of the kind displayed by the chorus as the liberating characteristic of the Sartrean open gaze, you find that in a lot of aging work, there's in truth nothing liberating or open about the gaze of the chorus in the old woman. It's always privileges youth. Even when she's, she's described, even when age is praised, it's praised in terms of how youthful it still is. So I'll leave that. I won't go into detail here. If the self-doubt of the chorus only produces new and more nuanced representations, one might ask after Zimmerman, what are old people to do? You only have more nuanced versions of the same. So Ved's play, I suggest, may be read as an implicit response to precisely this question. The representation of heterotemporality may be beyond the scope of language, it seems to say, but it is not beyond the scope of literature, clearly, which, while being in language, is able to convey the limitations of language. at the same time as documenting the failure of language to establish different and distinct categories, by constantly questioning the categories, which are the only warrant of stable identities. When you're able to distinguish one from the other, you're pointing to stable identity, but the language fails to do that in the play. So my point is that the play, Vaid's play, points to the success of the literary text in referencing the idea of radical heterotemporality, paving the way for imagining Indianness as changeable, essential, inessential, and porous. As I'll show in the next section, what the play offers in place of linguistic constructions of the aging body is an insistence on greater and sustained attention to its materiality, at the same time as it calls out a major blind spot of postcolonial theory, which is its predilection for constructivist analysis. So this next section is called Body Language. In an essay on national longing for cartographic form, Sumati Ramaswamy points to the importance of maps in visualizing the boundaries of the nation space. So basically, let me sum up her argument. She says that, if it was not for the map, the nation space would remain an abstract. You need to superimpose this human body for the map to feel real. So that's the argument that I'm talking about, how that is subverted, or how what Vaid's play does to that. So the power of national allegory emblematized in the historical hope that Mother India would command the sacrifices that its cartographic representation alone could not, however, is clearly eviscerated in Vaid's postcolonial dramatization. So despite the play beginning with the flesh and blood form of the mother as a metaphor for the nation, it also parodies nationalist assumptions insofar as her evident distress only serves to repel the children. So the more she's in distress, the more if she, they want to run away from her rather, instead of wanting to rescue her. So Sumati Ramaswamy's assumptions are reversed. The play shows them to be reversed. The more she's in trouble, the more they say, but what if she's our mother? We should deny it. We should pretend to be unaware of the truth. The truths we are unaware of can't hurt us. Unawareness is the mother of bliss, so we should scamp. So they want to leave her there. What unfolds in the following pages is the chorus's gradual abstraction of the substantive mother and its corresponding amplification of her symbolic function. So this is what happens at the start of the play. When this realization dawns on them, she might be a mother, they want to do is run away. But gradually they start to think, oh, maybe she's the nation. And that's when they start to think of ways of rescuing her. So I think what the play is demonstrating is it's reversing that process of which Ramaswamy speaks, where, you needed to imagine the abstraction of the map had to be imagined as a woman for it to inspire you to sacrifice yourself. But here then, the embodied mother has to be reimagined as this abstract category of the nation for her to have any kind of claim, exert any kind of claim over the chorus, that is, its children. More than the nation having to be imagined as a mother for it to feel real, it's now the embodied mother who has to be visualized as an intangible entity called the nation before a plight can elicit any response. And needless to say, and this is, not all embodied mothers can hope to attain the level of abstraction required to speak for the nation. And if you're marked by caste, class, religion as the nation's other, you can never hope to rise above the individual and the isolated. So there are all these mothers who've been marching in lots of different contexts, whose plight remains ignored because they cannot be reimagined as Mother India in the ways that other mothers might be. Vaid's analysis and critique of the cultural inclination to allegorize the nation, the increasing tendency to privilege the non-material over the embodied, now starts to make better sense. Although the fear of the body in social gerontology often translates as the fear of reducing age to the body alone, in general, as Elizabeth Anker contends, the idealized human body in its liberal configuration, either elides aspects of corporeal existence in the name of reason, or it normalizes them in the name of symmetry and likeness. While this idealized body and its corollary in the unified, nuclear, impermeable body politic may be traced back to the Middle Ages, it assumes more explicit parallels with a distinctly liberal subjectivity in the context of democracy. So this is where Elizabeth Anker's argument is that, you know, the imagery of the state as a body politic depends on an idealized body of a particular kind, one that is unified, impermeable, and successfully assimilated. And what that leads to is an unease with the messiness of real bodies. And this is the way, you know, and Anker's argument is, she concludes that, you know, there's a discrimination against non-normative bodies, etc. So Waird's play, I argue, challenges this idealization of the body of liberalism, which is in effect founded on a disavowal of embodiment in various ways, starting with an emphatic rejection of the discursive. So, you know, so throughout the play, you know, I mean, you know, unlike, you know, the Mother India of Bharat Bhiksha, the image, the Calcutta studio print that I started my talk with, you know, where silence is a condition of the medium, you know, it's a picture, she cannot talk back. But the old woman in Waird's play is actively weaponizing silence as an agential move. You know, she refuses to speak and refusing, you know, and her resistance to ideological appropriation by these representational economies of the nation. And I won't quote from the text here, but you can see that, you know, they get more and more, the more they're constantly trying to fill in her lack of speech with assumptions of what she might be thinking, she's sick, you know, does she think we are useless? She knows we are good for nothing, etc. So the power of the mother's silence then, evident in these quotations of text, is underscored by the fact that she remains that while she remains unperturbed by this non-stop chatter around her, the chorus is rattled, even threatened by her silence, repeatedly looking to fill in the blanks that she offers in response to its construction of her. If the mother's steadfast refusal of speech is readable as a potent or even if implicit valorization of the body, then her pointed embrace of, and this is from the text, music without words, serves as an equally powerful and this time explicit endorsement of the body. The mother has, for some 40 pages, the first 40 pages of play, the mother she's been at the center of the scene, you know, which mimics the scene of an ethnographic encounter. You know, she's the passive subject and who's there not for her own sake, and she's being exhibited and they're walking around her and they're talking about her, and, you know, they're on this edge of space, they're looking in and down upon her. And the last page, you know, she starts to sing and effectively negating their overdetermined gaze. And I draw on this, an excellent, I think, reminder, you know, the word that is used, the Latin source of the word, I don't know how to pronounce I don't have a Latin pronunciation. Is it resinere, which means to render invalid. So it draws by you know, resign can also, the more contemporary usage is that you're resigned to the judgment of others. But by refusing to speak, you know, she's resigned to the judgment of others, but also she renders invalid, you know, her ability to maintain her cool seems to bracket out this troll army of the chorus, you know, as she shrugs off the negativity, you know, that is heaped on her. She appears accepting of these insults, even as she derides the power of the chorus to insult her. So I think that two meanings of the word, the original and the more updated, are both useful because she's doing both, I think, by this refusal to speech. And then in the end, this breaking out into a song. So completely not engaging with them, but doing her own thing. Okay, so it's 40 minutes. Maybe I can take 5 more minutes. I think we started a few minutes late. Is that okay? And then I should be able to
works.
Okay.
Not a problem at all.
Okay, thank you. Amplifying the resounding effect of the silence that has characterized her for the better part of the play, the mother's very deliberate turn at the end towards music without words directs the audience attention away from the chorus's words without music very effectively then onto the aging body itself. And the chorus is, you know, is finally, it says it's afraid of the truth. And this is, I'm quoting from the text, the old woman raises her head very slowly. So these are stage description. stretches herself very slowly, gets off the bed very slowly, balances the bundle on her head, and a few moments before the end of the play joins the other characters whose amazement is reflected in their gradually fading voices. As their voices begin to fade, the old woman begins to open her mouth, out of which issues heavenly music without words. So the play ends with the mother's somatic as against the chorus's discursive performance, challenging the philosophical premise of the obsession with language to foreground instead a phenomenological point of view in which sounds, signs, movements, and rituals, they're constantly interpreting, is she moving, is she saying, is she sleeping? And these are figured as possibilities for living alterity and giving it expression. It's a quote from Zimmerman. As their voices start to fade, the old woman opens a mouth out of which issues heavenly music. In this final act of pitting the older woman against the chorus, the play underscores yet again her unique subjectivity and her final refusal to be restored to the bosom of the joint family, from which she's obviously been evicted. To the extent that the woman also stands for the nation, her rejection of the extended family then may also be read as the nation's disavowal of a cultural identity inseparable from this ostensibly unchanging family form. Even though all stages of human life are arguably more or less, last page. Even though all stages of human life are arguably more or less hospitable to the performance of heterotemporality or even radical heterotemporality, as a trope for the post-colonial nation, old age seems to me more valuable than either youth or midlife. As a particularly fine illustration of this tenet, Baird's play rescues the aging body in all its non-unified, unassimilated, and permeable glory, not to shore up the normativity of the unified and impermeable body of youth, as one might expect, but instead to exemplify a profound alternative to the essential nation, emblematized not just in the familial body of the nationalist imagination, but also the whole gamut of literary and sociological discourses in the post-colonial nation, in which this body is valorized. In Vaird's characterization, the body of the old woman nation is finally embraced for what it is. When the chorus points to the old woman to claim, who wouldn't want to be barely alive like that? So, they say, oh, she's barely alive. And then this other character says, if that's what barely alive means, who doesn't want to be barely alive? It's rejecting then the traditional reasons offered for embracing the body metaphor. Why do we embrace the body metaphor to describe the nation? We do that to confer unity, presumably, and integrity to the national body. Traits hardly associated with popular representations of age, Its characteristic trait then is vulnerability. Being old and barely alive, as the play makes clear, means to be like the mother, inessential, open, and impossible to totalize, as her scrambled temporality suggests. To that extent, then, the old mother of Vaird's play offers a template for defining Indianness that speaks much more to the realities of the post-colonial nation struggling with the xenophobia of a militant Hindutva than would the coherent and impermeable body of midlife or youth. And finally, reimagining Mother India as an older woman, I would argue, releases the nation from this tyranny of timelessness, as must be clear from the discussion above, even though Vaird's play sets out to stage an allegorical equivalence between the body and the nation, the aging body of the mother finally fails to neatly map onto Mother India of the nationalist imagination, not only causing the allegory to function self-reflexively to uncover the fault lines in the metaphors of nationalism, but also to imagine the nation in ways that are highly subversive of established conventions. An aging Mother India who embraces the messiness of real bodies not only paves the way for legitimization of non-normated bodies, she also enables a salient critique of an unease with the plurality and diversity of the national body politic that has come to be associated with political trends in India in the last 20 years. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Raja. Will you be open to questions and comments now?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, sure. The floor is now open to questions, comments, responses to her talk. Roy has a question. Roy, please go ahead.
First of all, thank you, Dr. Raja, for the wonderful lecture. I just wanted to make an observation. I was noticing in the picture that was shown that the aged woman was dressed in so-called traditional attire, so-called Indian traditional attire. But if we look at how critics like Ulka and Jira have commented about the most popular genre of Indian writing, the novel, how it is largely set in the metropolis, and how there is a concern as to whether the readers outside India will, understand certain words and the names of certain clothes, or the names of certain dishes. But here, the aged woman does not seem to have that concern. As in she does not seem to hesitate to present herself in a way that is quote unquote Indian. As in she's not bothered about whether the way that she's dressed will make sense to an outsider. I think maybe as you mentioned, her silence to the questions posed to her, if that can be seen as a kind of indifference, then does this indifference also give hope, not in an ultra nationalist sense, but in a sense where India is less concerned about making sense to the outside reader than being true to itself?
I think, okay, looking at this image, I don't think she's presenting, what you say, that she doesn't care about presenting herself as in traditional clothing. Is that what you said?
Yes, as in, she's not dressed like an old woman from the metropolis, so to speak.
Yeah, but I think the point of the body, I mean, it's called Bharat Bhiksha, right? She's presented as a beggar. She's presented as, hair is disheveled. She's, this idea of, it's not a body that's been looked after. And I don't think there's any element of pride, that you are reading into this image, that, somehow there's a kind of confidence that you're reading into her disheveled appearance, a certain kind of confidence in being able to present herself however she wants. But I don't see this image as presenting the image of the mother or India as a confident. I mean, after all, she's giving up her child. She's surrendering her child. And she's saying, the title is Bharat Bhiksha. To me, it says that she's offering that child. I mean, I don't know. She's not able to care for the child. I mean, I think Bharat Bhiksha can be interpreted in multiple ways. But India is being offered as a kind of, it's being offered, to Britannia. And I don't think the woman is offering that from a position of confidence. It's expressing her inability to care for her, that the child would have a better future. So I think it's justifying colonial rule rather than. Do you see what I mean? So I'm not sure what it is that you, or you want to make the point that you're making, irrespective of this image, then that point might make more sense, because the point that you're making doesn't seem to hold true for this image to me.
Yes, ma'am. I understand what you said. I was just wondering if if the way in which the person is dressed, whether it, as in we have this maybe stereotypical Indian image of a person who is not that interested in physical reality, who's not that interested in clothing, whether the clothing is up to date or whether it's fashionable, etc. I was wondering if the way in which the person is dressed was an attempt to show a certain indifference to that perspective. But now I get what you mean.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy. If there are other questions, comments? Dr. Raj, if you wouldn't mind, I had a question.
Yes, go ahead.
You mentioned multiple temporalities. And in that context, how do you see the image of the mother itself, the sheer endurance of the mother figure in myths around the world, and the idea of a modern nation state, which one could date as far as maybe the latter half of the 19th century? So how do you put the two together, as in the endurance of the mother figure and the idea of a modern nation state? If it's an allegory that's at work, then is there a dichotomy between the two?
So endurance of the mother figure. as a way of imagining the nation. Is that what you're saying?
And
that
as a
there
way
are
of
all these
imagining the
critiques,
nation.
I mean, okay, let me see if, and you can tell me if I've understood your question correctly, that there are all these feminist critiques of, women do not want to be think of, that there's it's problematic from lots of perspectives to think of the nation as a mother. And because it also invokes this idea of this biological, or a certain kind of family. And I'm thinking of this work of a number of New Zealand scholars, who have talked about, we need new ways of imagining the nation. Maybe, this kind of a familial kinship model in the end can become too exclusive. Like I said, that, if you belong to the cultural, religious other, then you cannot, then a mother who identifies as this cultural other of the nation then cannot be abstracted into, it's a kind of a, it's a specific, the identity of the nation as a mother is a specific identity, and it can also be a very exclusive identity, and there's a resistance to that. And and I know that, of this particular essay that I'm thinking of by these two New Zealand scholars who look for a much more kind of, non-affective model for thinking about how do you begin to imagine national belonging. And in the end, this I walked away from that essay thinking that a lot of these other metaphors of imagining the nation maybe haven't caught on, because at the end of the day, what you're trying to capture is the affective charge of belonging, that family gives. And in that sense, there might be however many problems that you may have intellectually with imagining the nation in kinship models, and for it's too exclusive, it's it's too predicated on separating the inside of who belongs and who doesn't belong, etc. But I find that the kind of metaphors of belonging, national belonging, that in the work of Rohit and Mistry, for instance, they offer, they capture that kind of, if you think of the patchwork quilt that he talks about, where you're bringing this idea of that national belongingness is, it's a fruit of labor. You have to work at it. It's craftsmanship. It's what people, it's not naturally there. It's not a given, and yet it captures that affective charge. So I constantly do try and think about, I think you're right to say that thinking of the nation as a mother has persisted in spite of all these kind of intellectual arguments against it. But the other models of national belonging haven't taken off. But there are attempts, and there are, at the end of the day, you have to find something that will meet both these needs, that it should capture this kind of effective relationship that you have with the nation, and at the same time, and I think Mistry's texts do that. I don't know if I've answered your question. I mean,
Yes,
I think
yeah? It does. Yes, it does answer my question. Yes, thank you for that. And I think Saurabh has a question. Saurabh, please go ahead.
Okay.
Hello, ma'am. That was really interesting talk. I wanted to. I this is one kind of observation actually, and I couldn't help look at the picture and think of actually the film Mother India, because when it came out, and a lot of the similarities of this picture, I was kind of resonating it with the film. I even actually was thinking of a film like Karan Arjun, because, for example, because here we see the decrepit mother giving the child to a new ruler, right? So I was thinking, why I thought Karan Arjun was because, where the mother, she kind of, waits for her to, she kind of gives off the two sons to the society, right? The two become, goes in different directions. So what I was thinking in that, and in the popular imagination, as you have also mentioned in your abstract, that the feeding off from the maternity of the body itself of the mother. So how do you juxtapose what you talked about as the post-colonial irony itself, that that this vision of these sons, okay, they becoming as a symbol of a new India, let's say, quote unquote, while while at the same time you're also arguing that the vision of the figure of the Mother India feeding off the materiality of the aging body. So does this kind of a play, does this show us a kind of transformative journey, or does the post-colonial reading the mother figure through the post-colonial paradigm kind of again brings us back to the figure of
so
the mother?
Not just reading, it's not just the mother figure, right? It's the nation as an aging mother. So there's a difference, isn't it? You think of the nation as a mother is very different from think of the nation as a destitute old woman. So gender, there's and I think the moment you introduce gender, and this was the bit of the paper that I actually left out because it was getting too long, was that and this is an argument that I think it's made also in the introduction to the 2 volumes of women writing in India by Tharu and Lalita, that when you you think of these 2 distinct temporalities. Say Partha Chatterjee is a good example of that. Where the temporality of the home is unchanging, essential. This is where you preserve your authentic Indianness, and then the temporality of the outside, in which you're allowed to you allow modernity to make incursions. And that works very well, it's built around gender. So women occupy the home space, and that's the space of authenticity. And men, at least, at that point, within that 19th century Bengal, that idea worked. But the moment, so in a play like this, when you introduce age into the category, so what is this? The mother who has been evicted from the space of the home. She's repeatedly described as a woman who's been abandoned by her family, etc. So what her being not accommodated within the family, but actually occupying this place on the street, where everybody, passes by are walking and trying to speculating about who she could be. What does it point to? It points to a fracture within the space of the home that was seen as unproblematically representing continuity and tradition, because the home space is now split between women don't unproblematically, the bourgeois home doesn't unproblematically represent a continuity of the past, because it's now split between the old woman and the young woman. Typically the old woman is evicted because the young woman is daughter-in-law. There's a pattern in a lot of these narratives where, the young woman is modernized, the daughter-in-law, she's westernized, and she kicks the mother out. So what that shows is that the home, that neither gender nor home are available unproblematically or seamlessly to represent continuity and tradition in the post-colonial nation, as they did, in the kind of material that Partha Chatterjee was looking at. Remind me of your question again. I think what I want to say here is that that once you introduce age into the picture, a lot of these kinds of narratives, the space itself, the spatial spaces of the nation need to be reconfigured. That's what I want to say. But if you ask me your question again, then I can try and address your question more directly.
Ma'am, just drawing from this, basically, when you're saying, when we bring in the idea of age into reading a nation as a text per se. Yeah. So I was thinking, now looking at it, at the question of age in the present day, where the idea of a country is becoming, to be a strong country, to be a young country, right? And to be this virile, masculine, quote unquote, whatever paradigm is going on. Yeah. So in the light of that, how does, so I was just asking, and so you mentioned the post-colonial irony that comes with the reading of such a text, right? So how does that irony fit into this vision of?
I think what I'm saying, did I use the word irony? I think what I want to say is that that's one way of imagining the nation, where and you think of this hyper-masculine body, but it's also this perfect body. It's a normative body. There's nothing wrong with the body. In fact, it holds its shape. But I'm saying that you think of, so this is, I think, in a sentence, if you wanted to ask me what my paper is about, I'm saying that this is one we often think of, the most obvious way of reading this play is that imagining the post-colonial nation as a destitute old woman is to talk about post-colonial decline. That look at this nation, India as a nation has been abandoned by its children. But I'm saying that if you pay close attention to the aging body, then it is exactly the kind of things that are seen as pathological in the aging body. Its lack of ability to hold its shape, its permeability, And I read that alongside this scrambling, you know, of the different temporalities, this inability to tell at what age is she young, is she old. She along, you know, along this binary of youth and age, you know, she occupies a very slippery, in some places she's very young, in other places she's described as very old. So I think, and that's the nature of the embodied age, you know. They say that even when you lose lots of senses, you lose, your hearing actually improves with age, you know, which is why they say that he's not so badly off, he can actually hear better than he could in his youth. So there's medical basis for that certain senses can actually improve. So what I want to say is that the aging body, the most obvious way of reading it as a nation as an aging body must be there to signal decline or post-colonial decay or abandonment. But I'm saying that the aging body, when you pay close attention, it counters this image of this toxic masculine, you know, body, hyper masculine, holds its shape, you know, and that's the body that is kind of being mobilized to imagine. And in that context, when you read Ved's play, here is then a way of reimagining the nation that allows, you know, that where age is not figured as decline. So coming to this title of this talk, which was, you know, or the broad framework within which I'm presenting this talk, which is citing vulnerability, that here is this vulnerability of the aging body that is now being drawn on as this strength to reimagine the nation in ways that are enabling, you know, and reconfiguring vulnerability, you know, that this kind of vulnerability that you might see as a liability, or in stereotypical readings might be read as liability, actually allows us to do something else, to reimagine the nation in unprecedented or in new ways. I think it was not a sentence, but I think that's what I wanted to say, what I was trying to say in this paper.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Are there any more questions, comments?
Hi, hello.
Hi, Pramod, I can hear you.
Yeah, all right, okay. It's more like a comment than a query, but there is a very strong theological angle or scriptural angle to portrayals of women as deities, right? It's a traditional trope, mother goddess / mother India / whatever.
Yeah.
So in that kind of context, how does the destitute woman or motherland force us to rethink the mother goddess image, principally because by definition goddesses don't age? So it's not really so much about the nation as much as the gendered body that I'm thinking about.
So what was you speak of how, you know, there's a strong religious angle to imagining the mother or the nation as a deity, and in that context, how
does then the reconfiguring of the nation as a destitute mother sit with this kind of deification that we are so used to?
So I think I would say, I think the image that I started with shows that there are all these different ways of, you know, that the mother is this resplendent, or the nation as this resplendent goddess. That's one tradition of thinking about the nation. But that's also, you know, I think what I'm arguing here is that once you bring in age, it's no longer, I think the nation, exactly what you said, that, you know, thinking of the nation as a mother goddess is essential, unchanging, because deities don't age. And here then, and that is useful for imagining in India that is essential, unchanging, timeless. Or a nation that is fixed in time. But I'm also thinking of, you know, when you think, when I mean, a play is by definition existential, right? You know, everything that moves, you know, it starts with the person or present on the stage, and every act of the play changes the movement. You know, there's an existential quality to a performance. And I think it's that changeability. By bringing in the nation as an aging woman, it is contradicting or questioning or contesting this idea of the nation, which is figured as a deity and therefore which is unchangeable. So I think it's the unchangeableness of the nation, or the essential unchanging quality or timeless quality of the nation, that is being contested, and that cannot be figured through the nation as a deity, because, like you said, deities don't age. So if you want to reimagine the nation in ways that are inclusive, then then the most useful way of doing that is through the aging body. And in that sense, recuperating the aging body, from signaling decline. Does that? I mean, I think you helped me think through some of this. I think that's what you've done. But
well, that's interesting, because the idea of the recuperative as being posted or pasted onto the aging body is itself a deeply divided description or portrayal in terms of how representational strategies go. But yes, because also conventionally age also commands respect and reverence. So the reverence is also built into troping something as old, elderly, even ancient, and therefore the ancientness of a nation. That also, but although you did speak about the decrepitude and the destitute nature of this, it's also so it's fascinating how deeply divided this is. So thank you so much, Ira. Over to Anna for concluding vote of thanks, unless there is a question at all.
I don't think we have any more questions. Anna, I'm over to you now for your for the vote of thanks.
Yeah, thank you. We've been having terrible network connections, all of us, and I mean, actually had to drop out within a few minutes of joining, so you didn't get to meet her, Ira. But all of us who are here and those who joined, some of us who left midway, would all like to thank you very much indeed for this talk on a Friday evening when people are busy. People turned up for this. So thank you to all the people who joined, all the students who joined. But thank you most of all to you, Ira, for illuminating talk, and one which made us all think about the intersection of aging, gender, and the nation. Especially because, as some of the questions pointed out, in this age of hypermasculinity and this posturing that everybody is up to with the nation, looking at this picture itself gives us another way of thinking about this country. Right. So we always talk about the ancient value systems and the ancient civilizations. But if you were to think about the country itself as aging, moving into decrepitude, then where would you be? The recuperative nature of what you were talking about would then maybe help us to think about India all over again. Thank you so much for all that you did.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for your questions.
Thank you, Ira.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, bye.
Bye. Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.